Good morning. Let's try that one more time. Good morning. It is so good to be with you all here today. Now, I don't want you to get a big head from this, but I've been bragging on you this weekend. I had an opportunity to go to a wedding of two of my dear friends who I grew up with, saw a lot of folks I haven't seen in a long time. You know, when you see people, they want to catch up on how life's going, what you've been into. And multiple times, people asked me, they said, I hear you've already got a job lined up for after school. How's that going? And I just have to tell them, man, it's wonderful. Grundy Street is such a great place, full of amazing people, and I'm just proud to be there. You are a blessing to my life, and it's a great blessing when I get to brag on you, and I just want you to know that. I am proud to be a part of this family and to be looking forward to the years to come of working with you, and I'll tell anybody who asks. So it's great to be with you this morning. This morning, I want to take a moment and talk about what we might call the small things. There are many things in life that we consider small, whether it's small in size or small in importance, and sometimes it's easy to overlook those. But let me tell you, sometimes the small things make all the difference. An example from history, perhaps, might be good at this time. Take you back to January 28th in 1986, and some of you, just by that date, already know what I'm about to talk about. This was at a time when our country was still very involved in things related to space. This was not too long after we'd sent men to the moon, and now we were doing a lot of work with satellites. And it was at this time that the Challenger space shuttle was scheduled to launch, January 28th, 1986. Now, the space shuttle is an amazing machine. It's intricate. It's very meticulously designed so that when properly put together, it is perfect for the missions it is supposed to do. And the Challenger space shuttle was given the mission of going up and doing some work on the satellites we already had in orbit. They were going to launch a couple of more, and they were also going to take time to observe Halley's Comet, which was passing near the sun at this time, a rare occasion. And on the Monday that it was supposed to launch, the temperature was pretty chilly, frigid, if you will, even for Florida, at a cold 26 degrees at the time of launch. Now, many theories, some of them possibly having some truth to them, others being maybe not so accurate, have been made as to why the space shuttle inevitably malfunctioned. But the official report is that because of the chilly conditions, a failure occurred. A failure occurred in the primary and secondary O-ring seals that joined the space shuttle's right solid rocket booster to the rest of the equipment. And because of this failure, pressurized gas leaked into the external propellant tank, causing it to cave in on itself, to implode. And the resulting explosion destroyed the entire craft and killed all 7 members of the crew. And of course, those of you who were alive at the time remember it as a tragedy, as a disaster, all because of just 2 little O-ring seals. The same kind of seals in theory, though likely not of the same quality, that we think of when we have to just repair a washing machine or any kind of household appliance. Just 2 O-ring seals caused the death of 7 people and the loss of millions and millions of dollars. 7 families were changed forever on that day just for 2 little seals. Little things can have a massive impact. They can change lives. And the Bible has something to say about what we might think of as one of those little things. If we turn in our Bibles to James chapter 3, James, one of my very favorite books in the entire Bible, so full of practical wisdom, sometimes called the book of the Monday through Saturday Christian. James has a lot to say about many daily things, and one of them we find here in chapter 3. in the first 12 verses of chapter 3, we see James talk about the tongue and the power of the tongue, along with the danger of it. Now, of course, we're not talking about the muscle that actually sits in our mouth, the tongue, and all of the biological things that it does. James is using this as an analogy, not for the physical being of the tongue, but rather for our words, the things that we speak, the way in which we communicate. And James will tell us that it's very possible for us to run into danger with our words. As we begin, let's read the entirety of that passage. Turn with me there to James chapter 3, and let's read verses 1 through 12 together. James says, "Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For we all stumble in many ways. And if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing, my brothers. These things ought not be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Can a fig tree, my brothers, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water." James tells us about the dangers of the tongue. Now, from this passage, there are 5 things we're going to look at. The first 2 have to do with the nature of the tongue, the nature of our words, and the following 3 are shortcomings, problems that we can run into, but that we can also avoid when it comes to how the tongue works. Now, the first thing we want to look at is something to do with the nature of the tongue, the nature of words, if you will, and we find it in verse 2. James once again says, "We all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body." What does this tell us? The problem of words is a common problem. It's a common problem. This is not a unique issue to any one of us. Now, some of you, like me, might think, well, I think I've got a little more of a problem with it than other people, and maybe so. But this is something that we all struggle with. I was talking to a fellow preacher earlier this week, talking about what we were going to talk about on Sunday. And I said, well, I'm going to be talking about taming the tongue, so I think I'm going to go to Goodwill and buy one of those handheld mirrors. I'm going to get some duct tape and just duct tape it right here. That way the person that needs to hear the sermon most, I can look at the whole time. We all have a problem with words. We all struggle in many ways, James says. We all are tempted differently with struggles, but we all have this same problem. Have you ever said something that you regret in a moment of emotion? Have you ever said something in a moment of anger that you later thought, man, I really wish I wouldn't have said that. That just didn't come out right. I regret those words. We all have. We've all said things that we thought harmless, but they've had a far-reaching impact. All made jokes that we thought were funny, but didn't really think about the implications of them. This is a common struggle, and it's not a new problem. It's not a unique problem to our first century or our 21st century context. All through the Bible, we see people who struggled with controlling what they said. Perhaps the most common example that we could draw to mind is that of Peter. Peter, of course, being one of Jesus' very closest friends, and yet over and over throughout his ministry, Peter will just say the most stunning things, the most outrageous things that we would think, man, I would never say that to Jesus. And Peter, he rebukes him. He tells him, no, Lord, you're not going to go to Jerusalem and die. And Jesus has to put him in his place at that time. And Jesus tells him, Peter, you're going to deny me. And Peter says, no, not me, Lord. I would never deny you. And of course, he ends up denying the Lord 3 times. So this is not something that we need to feel ashamed of. Not something that we need to take on as a burden unto ourselves and say, no one else can understand this problem. No, this is a common issue. There's one thing I want to notice quickly in this verse before we move on, and that's this. James says, the one who doesn't stumble in what he says is a perfect man. And sometimes we look at that word perfect and we say, well, there's my excuse. James says, you're perfect if you get the tongue right, and so no one can be perfect, and so I can just say whatever I want to say, and that's just that. After all, who can be perfect? Now, we can't be perfect in the sense that we always do what's right at all times with no mistakes and no sin, but that's not what James means here. This is the idea often seen in the Bible with the word perfect of completeness, of readiness, of being fully equipped. James isn't saying you can't tame the tongue, so just give up and move on, say whatever you want to say. No. He's saying if you tame the tongue, you're going to be ready to tame the rest of the body. The tongue, if you will, is the gateway to control. If we want to be people who are self-controlled, that one of those fruits of the Spirit that we are to exhibit, we need to start with our words. We need to start with what we say and how we communicate. And if we do, well, we're right on track to being people who are complete in that idea of self-control. So it's a common problem. And secondly, this is a problem that matters. It's a problem that matters. Sometimes in our culture today, we see people who take pride in being those who just say whatever comes into their head, and they take it as this kind of badge of strength, that they're not going to care how anyone responds or what anyone thinks of their words, and so they're just going to let them loose. They're just going to say them. But James in verses 3 through 5 once again gives us examples of how small things have big impact. Thinking about the example of the horse. The horse, of course, being a great animal, incredibly strong, but just a little bridle, a bit in the mouth, and you can control the entire animal. Now, of course, you have to break the horse. You can't just, get a wild horse out of the middle of nowhere, throw a bit in its mouth and think it's going to do what you want. It has to be trained, but once it is, it'll obey every time. It'll do what it's been trained to do just because of that little bit in its mouth. And then, of course, he appeals to a very common example that they would have had in that day of the maritime boats. These boats, of course, not like ours today, powered by engines of various kinds, but powered by the wind. And he says, they're driven about by great winds. And of course, when a storm rolls up, we've got winds that could be in excess of 30, 40, 50 miles per hour. But the boat, even in those great winds, is controlled by a little rudder. Now, if we look at some of the rudders on the huge ships today, we think, well, that's not so little. But compared to the size of the vessel, it's really just a small piece of the entire boat. But it determines exactly where the boat will end up. Big things that are controlled by small things. Our life, how we decide to live, how we decide to interact with people, all of that is tied back to our words, to our tongue, if you will. Words matter because once you say something, you can't get it back. Once you let those words out of your mouth, there's nothing more you can do. They're not coming back. People aren't going to unhear them. They're out there forever. And we've, of course, seen, even in the news, how that has destroyed people's reputations. It was once famously said that it takes a lifetime to build a reputation, but it takes one word to destroy it. Our words matter so much. Our words impact us, certainly, but they impact others. And that should be a consideration that we give great thought to. Our words impact other people. They impact how other people think about what we're involved in. Our words impact the work of the church. Our words impact God. How are we talking about our church family? How do we talk about Christ in the workplace or just in daily life? When people hear us speak about these things, do they come away thinking, well, that's something I want to be a part of? Well, that sounds wonderful. Well, I want to go to church with that guy. Or do they think, man, I don't want to be a part of that. That doesn't sound very loving. They don't sound like they're very united or they even like each other very much. Our words are of eternal importance. And so this is a common problem. It's a problem that matters. But then James gives us 3 things to watch out for. 3 things to avoid with our words. And the first is, our words can be used for evil. Our words can be used for evil. Look at verse 6 again. The tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. Now, if we took this verse on its own without any context of what James is talking about, we'd say, well, man, I just ought to never talk again. The tongue is just evil. And so nothing good can come out of it seems like James is saying. So I'm just going to become a mute. There's no use in talking if that's all that comes out. Well, of course, James here is not saying that the tongue is only used for evil, but rather that it's easily used for evil. If we use our words for evil, intentionally or otherwise, we can ruin or stain, as the text says, or even set on fire our lives. Our words, if not carefully checked, can destroy us. Think about Judas when he betrayed Jesus. How did that start? He didn't go up to the, chief priest and start giving him sign language. No, he used his words. He betrayed Jesus and it destroyed him. It destroyed his entire life. Think about an example from the Old Testament in the book of Daniel. The king Nebuchadnezzar, who though he had seen all the great things that the Lord had done through Daniel and his friends, he still said, I'm the greatest king in the whole land. Nothing is better than Babylon, and I'm the ruler of it all. And God humbles him. God sends him out into the wilderness to essentially live as an animal until Nebuchadnezzar is humble enough to say, maybe I'm not the one in charge, and he acknowledges God. Words have consequences. They have impact, and when they're used for evil, well, the consequences are going to follow as such. Many times, we don't even realize how our words are going to impact our lives. We don't realize how our words are going to impact others. Think about Job's friends. When Job is in the very depths of sorrow, when everything in his life has been stripped away from him and he's left with nothing but himself and God, Job's friends, they're really good at comforting him when they just come and they sit with him and they're just present. But when they started talking, things started going downhill. No doubt their intentions were good. They were meant to comfort Job, to help him in his hard time, but they were not very good at doing that. Their words, though meant in love, didn't communicate what they thought they were trying to say. They had a negative impact. There are times when we, in a spirit of love, trying to help those around us, we say some things that aren't very loving. They're aimed to be, but they're not. Because we don't consider where the other person is. We don't consider how our words might come across more as judgment, more as trying to tell them, well, you just need to shape up and act right, when we really need to meet them where we are, or where they are, rather. When we use the tongue, the words of our mouth for evil, intentionally or otherwise, our words have become a tool for hell. This can be unintentional. Sometimes we unintentionally help the enemy out under the excuse, well, I'm just the kind of person who says whatever comes to mind. When the tongue is left without a filter and unchecked, evil will come out of it. And so we must be vigilant in controlling it. So one thing we need to look out for, number one, the tongue can be used for evil. But number two, we cannot tame it. Now, don't get ahead of yourself and think I'm saying something I'm not trying to say. We can control it, but we cannot fully tame it. Now think about verses 7 and 8 with me. When you tame an animal, as James is talking about, you don't have to keep taming it, if you will. When you break an animal and you bring it under control, you teach it what it needs to know, it will respond the same way essentially every time, because that's how it's been conditioned to respond. It learns and it moves forward in keeping with its learning. The tongue, on the other hand, can't be tamed in this same way because we're people. We're imperfect. We are dynamic. We have minds that are so complex and actions that respond to different situations differently. We can't tame the tongue in the same way that we think about taming an animal. The tongue will not respond in the same way every time just because people don't respond the same way every time. And so, because of that, we have to learn to control it. Not to tame it and then leave it be, but to control it. To be constantly vigilant. To think about what we say before we let it out, and to ask ourselves just some basic questions about it. How will this be interpreted? How will this affect the people I'm talking to? We have to be careful to control our tongues, not just to put them on autopilot, thinking that everything that will come out is going to be all right. Though the tongue can't be tamed, it can be trained, and it can be aimed at righteousness. We must check what comes out of our mouths before it leaves, because as we've already said, once it leaves, that's that, and it's not going to come back. We can use the tongue for evil, intentionally or otherwise. The tongue can't be tamed, and so we have to be vigilant in controlling it. And then number three, the third thing we need to look out for that James tells us about is that the tongue can be hypocritical. The tongue can be hypocritical. Look again at verses 9 through 11 with me. James says of the tongue there, with it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in his likeness. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Verse 12, can a fig tree, my brothers, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water. I don't know about you, but verse 9 really gets me to thinking. We bless God with our words. We bless him in prayer and song. We talk about how wonderful and great he is and thank him for all the things we've done. But then James says, with that same mouth, we curse those who are made in his image. How do we talk about people? How do we talk about our Christian brothers and sisters. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not pointing the finger. I get frustrated with people all the time. There are teams that I have to work in at school, sometimes with people I don't like very much. They don't do their jobs, and I wish they would. And I get frustrated. But I have to be careful. You have to be careful. We have to check ourselves to remember that no matter how frustrated we might be with someone, no matter how much we might want to sit them down and tell them everything they're doing wrong, and sometimes even those feelings of animosity and what they're doing can translate into saying, well, they're just a bad person. And then we start to insult their character, even if it's just in our minds. That's a soul. That's somebody that Jesus died for. Somebody that God said was worth saving. And I ought to treat them as such. I ought to talk about them as such. That's challenging. That's hard to do, but James says that's what we need to do. We all know people, and if you don't, you might be who it is. We all know people who will say one thing and then turn around and do another. We all know people who like to play the middleman between two parties, and they'll tell one party something, and they'll turn around and tell the other party something completely different. We call them, two-faced. They're dishonest. They're not genuine. They're just trying to benefit themselves, and they'll say whatever they need to in order to have that happen. We can't be these kind of people as Christians. We cannot be these kind of people as Christians. Christians need to be the same all the time. We need to be genuine no matter the situation in word and deed. Now, don't get me wrong. There are situations in which we have to adapt how we act and how we talk for the betterment of the situation. That's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about our character. We're talking about the moral values that we stand on. We can't compromise and change the way that we talk because of the situation. We have to be genuine all the time, not two-faced, not two-tongued. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, do our words, even about Christ, match our actions? Does the way that we conduct ourselves match what we say about being a Christian? Do we talk? Do we communicate, which is more than just talking, in a way that portrays what Christ would have us to be? Can people tell that we are devoted to God, or is it just lip service? Are we just claiming to be Christians and not really acting like it? You see, the tongue can be a lot of things, but perhaps the most harmful thing that it can be is this right here, hypocritical. And so we have to look out for these things. The tongue can be used for evil. It can't be perfectly tamed, and it can certainly be hypocritical. So what do we do about that? How do we respond to these things? Well, in consideration of the first, that the tongue can be used for evil, we have to stay vigilant. We have to stay vigilant. We can't completely tame it, and so we have to be looking out to control it. Don't be lazy with your words. Don't be lazy with your words. And again, I'm preaching to me right now. Often it's really easy to make excuses like, man, I'm just tired today. I'm stressed today. Many other things could be added to the list. And we use these excuses to have the excuse to say whatever we want. And don't get me wrong. Some of these things are real considerations. They're things that affect us cognitively in the way that we act. But we have to be vigilant of those. If we know that we're tired or we know that we're stressed, maybe we need to take a little extra time before we say something, especially in a time of emotion or anger. We have to be careful with our words. We have to measure what we say before we say it. Second, let's consider our words and the effect that they have on people, because if we don't, they can do a lot of damage. The very first thing that we're taught in communication is that for better or worse, the message, what we say or what we do, how we communicate, is in the realm of the receiver. When I was growing up, my dad said it this way. He said, it doesn't matter what you say, it matters what people hear. It doesn't matter what you say, it matters what people hear. Because of this idea, we have to measure our words carefully, considering, of course, the situation and the individual. I could say the same thing, word for word, in the same way to 3 separate people, and not one of them would take it the same way. We have to be vigilant of the situation, vigilant of how we're coming across, because even things that we might say in love can be heard in a way that harms others. That's something we have to consider and be careful of. Because wouldn't it be terrible for us to try and help someone, to try and love them in the way that we should, and yet because of how we communicate that, it harms them? We need to consider our words and the effect that they will have. And then finally, the final application for the morning, we need to practice what we preach. We need to practice what we preach. This is something I've been told 1,000 times and one by my mother, and I'm thankful for it. If we're going to claim to be Christians, we have to live consistent with that. And we have to act consistent with that. We don't need to be double-tongued, double-faced, double-minded, or double anything else. We must be consistent in the people that we claim to be and the people that we are. Let us be genuine and pure in all of our actions toward others. Small things can make a big difference, and the Bible is full of examples of this fact. This is just one among many, but this one, it pertains to all of us. It's something we deal with that impacts us every single day. It impacts our relationships. It impacts the people who even we just meet on the street or at work. And so it's of chief importance. If we were to boil down the lesson into one question for all of us to consider, it's this: will you control your tongue, or will you let it control you? It's really the only 2 options. Will you control your tongue? Will you measure the words that come out of your mouth, the way that they are communicated, the impact that it has on others? Will you take responsibility for and control that? Or will you let it control you? Will you let it determine the outcome of the situation? All of us must consider this not only today, but every single day. See, we choose how the power of the tongue is expressed. It will have an impact, whether we like it or not, but we decide if that impact will be for good or if that impact will be for evil. Today, the question for each of us is, how are we using our words? Are we using them for good, for the spreading of the gospel, for the encouraging of one another, or are we using them for evil, for hypocrisy, for tearing others down? This morning, if you're a Christian, do you need to make right with your words? Do you need to recommit yourself to Christ in the way that you talk, in the way that you act in accordance with your talking? If you do this morning, you've got a family here that loves you. We'll pray with you and for you. We'll support you in any way that we can. Perhaps this morning, it's not necessarily that you need forgiveness, but you need strength. Life can be hard. And sometimes in the hard times, our words slip and our actions follow. Again, you have a family here that loves you, that wants to support you, wants to pray with you. If you have that need this morning, don't hesitate. But perhaps this morning, someone here is not a Christian, not a member of God's family, of Christ's body. Perhaps you need to make that good commitment, to leave the life of sin behind, the old man, the life that just really you let it control you, and you need to submit yourself to Christ, to His service, and to enjoy the blessings therein. This morning, if that's your need, it would be our greatest joy to assist you in doing that. Whatever you need this morning, please let it be known and come as we stand and sing together.